So, is the press freedom under threat under the BJP rule? Is the BJP government murdering journalists with impunity? Is freedom of expression under threat under the BJP government? No, none of that stuff is true. And I'll tell you why on today's episode. My name is Sham Sharma. Welcome to the Sham Sharma Show. Hello, and welcome. Welcome to another brand spanking new edition of the Sham Sharma Show. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you. Alright, so by now, since 2014, you've probably read article after article after article after article on how the free press is being stifled in India and how the free press is being strangled in India and how the Modi government and Modi personally is trying to destroy journalism and the press in India and is murdering journalists with impunity. So I'm sure you read all those articles. I'm sure you've seen all those opinion pieces. I'm sure you've seen all those TV reports. So is that actually true? Let's look at some of the information. Let's look at some of the sources that these people are quoting, and let's look at the information that those sources provide, and let's dig into those sources a little bit. And before I really jump into it, if you're new to the show, welcome. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. And if you are a regular watcher, if you're not subscribed already, make sure to subscribe. Also, before I start, I want to make sure that I thank Sham BJP. He's a Twitter handle who has done some fantastic work on this particular topic as well. And he was actually an inspiration on me looking into some of this information myself and actually putting on this video. So I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. I have used some of the information that he has put out in that Twitter thread. So it's a fantastic Twitter thread. If you haven't seen it already, the link to his profile is provided in the description below, and I would highly recommend you go check out that. Alright, so a lot of these news publications and organizations and articles are quoting institutions like the Committee to Protect Journalists, the International Federation of Journalists, and the Reporters Without Borders. So some of them are claiming this International Federation of Journalists report that came out, and it talked about how India is the 7th most dangerous countries for journalists and media staff between 1990 and 2015, and they directly attribute this to the Modi government. They say that the Modi government is responsible for creating this situation, for intimidating journalists and for murdering journalists and turning India into a dangerous place for journalists. Well, what they fail to often mention that the BJP government only came to power in 2014. So the period between 1990 and 2015, for a vast majority of that period, it was the Congress government which was in power. So if somebody should be blamed into making India a dangerous place for journalists and media staff, it should be the Congress government. Then, of course, there's a claim being made that ever since the BJP government came into power, ever since Modi came into power, because he hates the press and because he hates press freedom, he is wantonly and brazenly murdering journalists left, right, and center under his rule. And the media pretty much attributes any death that occurs for a journalist to the BJP. So let's see if that's true. Let's see if all these journalists' deaths that have happened since the Modi government came to power, if the BJP is actually responsible for these deaths. Looking at the Committee to Protect Journalists website, if you look at their database and if you look at the journalists that have been killed between 2014 and 2018, and where the motive is actually clear for the murder, there are about 9 journalists. So we'll go through all these journalists as well. So there's Tarun Kumar Acharya, who worked for Kanak TV. So was he murdered by the BJP? No, he was murdered in Orissa under the leadership of Naveen Patnaik. Then you have MVN Shankar, who worked for the organization Andhra Prabha. He was murdered, again, not in a BJP state, in Andhra Pradesh, which is again controlled by the TDP, not the BJP. Then Jagendra Singh, murdered in UP under Akhilesh Yadav. Karun Mishra, murdered in UP. Rajdev Ranjan, murdered in Bihar, again not under BJP, under Nitish Kumar. Gauri Lankesh, whose murder was completely, without any shred of information, completely blamed on the BJP government and on right-wing fringe elements, was murdered in Congress-ruled Karnataka. Shantanu Bhaumik, working for Dinrat, was murdered in Tripura under CPIM rule. Rajesh Mishra, working for Dainik Jagran, was murdered in UP under the BJP rule. Then Sudeep Datta Bhaumik, again working for Syandan Patrika, murdered in Tripura under, again, the CPIM rule. That's the information that we have available from the CPJ website. So as you can see, a vast majority of the journalists that have been murdered in non-BJP states. And as you know, law and order situation is a state subject. Then let's cross-reference some of this information with the International Federation of Journalists website. So if you look at the 2015 report, there's again Jagendra Singh murdered in UP. There's again Sandeep Kothari who was murdered in BJP-ruled Madhya Pradesh. Then you have Raghavendra Dubey in Bihar. Then you have Sanjay Pathak, again UP. Then you have Hemant Yadav, again UP. Then you have Mithilesh Pandey, Bihar. Then looking at 2016 statistics for the International Federation of Journalists, you have Indradev Yadav, who was again murdered in Bihar. You have Kishore Dave, who was murdered in Gujarat, and Dharmendra Singh, who was again murdered in Bihar. So again, from the information that we have available for CPJ and from the International Federation of Journalists, you can see that a majority of these journalist deaths have occurred in states that are not ruled by the BJP. But wrongly, often wrongly, all of these deaths are attributed to the BJP. All of these deaths are attributed to some right-wing elements. And they're trying to create this idea where Hindus are just walking around, just murdering journalists left, right, and center. And that is completely untrue, and that is very dishonest, and that's something that needs to be called out. Another thing that a lot of these organizations quote is a Committee to Protect Journalists report that said India was 12th in the 2017 Global Impunity Index, which means how often journalists are murdered with impunity without no real repercussion. And a lot of people are quoting that report and again putting it on the BJP, putting it on Modi. But the thing is that this report as well is between the period of 2007 to 2017. Again, for a majority of that time period, the Congress government has been in power, not the BJP government. So again, you have to take this report with a grain of salt as well when it comes to the BJP. You have to put the blame, majority of the blame actually should go, which is on the Congress's shoulders. Then again, coming to another source that a lot of these news organizations use, and that's Reporters Without Borders. And they talk about this global press freedom index where India has slipped a few points ever since the Modi government came into power. And if you actually read the explanation that Reporters Without Borders gives in its rankings about India, you will see the insane bias that this organization has towards the BJP government and towards a nationalist government in India. So let me read you that paragraph and you make that decision yourself. So it says, with Hindu nationalists trying to purge all manifestations of anti-national thought from the national debate, self-censorship is growing in the mainstream media. Again, it provides absolutely no information of how Hindu nationalists are actually trying to purge all manifestations of anti-national thought from national debate. There is absolutely no evidence provided to that effect. But the thing is, often in the media, you can just make a statement like that and then just be like, well, it's probably true. Journalists are increasingly the targets of online smear campaigns by the most radical nationalists who vilify them and even threaten physical reprisals. Well, you know what, guys? Welcome to the internet. You're talking about online smear campaigns. That is 85% of the internet. 85% of the internet is people swearing at other people and calling them names. So if you're new to the internet, welcome. And it's also funny how it talks about, journalists being targeted online by nationalist elements, but it doesn't talk about journalists like Rohit Sardana, journalists like Rubika Liaquat, journalists like Arnab Goswami. Even though I do not agree with a lot of Arnab Goswami says, and he sometimes runs the Republic TV like a Fox News kind of show, which I don't really think I like. But even then, they don't make a mention of when these people get threats, when these people get trolled, when these people get called names. So why is journalistic freedom and journalistic freedom of expression only important when you're talking against Hindus? Then it says prosecutions are also used to gag journalists who are overly critical of the government, with some prosecutors invoking section 124A of the Penal Code, under which sedition is punishable by life imprisonment. No journalist has so far been convicted of sedition, but the threat encourages self-censorship. I don't agree that such a charge should be leveled on journalists, willy-nilly at least. And they say themselves that no journalist has been charged with that so far. So, I mean, there's your answer right there. Then it says the government has also introduced a new foreign funding regulations to limit international influence. So why would you need international influence in domestic media? Why would you want international money with vested interests to come and control what domestic media has to say? Isn't that completely antithetical to what the freedom of press should be all about? So it goes on in the same way, and you can see the clear bias that Reporters Against Borders has against this national BJP government in India. So if you report the news with such extreme bias, if you report the news when you hide half the facts, then how seriously do you expect expect people to take your rankings. Because I really don't take these rankings seriously, because the explanation behind these rankings show extreme bias. So again, as you can see, there's not a lot of evidence really to back the claim that the BJP government and Narendra Modi is clamping down on journalists, is out there to murder journalists left, right, and center willy-nilly. Because of most of these journalist murders that have happened in non-BJP states. And even in the murders that have happened in BJP states, there's a very good point maybe to be made about how the government can sometimes turn a blind eye to what the mafia corporate nexus does in these states, and that the government should actually do a lot more. And a lot of the times the government doesn't look into these issues because they're like, you know what, it's going to be too much work, and more often than not we're going to find someone that in the government that's probably a little bit connected to this. Now, that might or might not be the case in the murders that have happened either in the BJP states or in the non-BJP states. But that's a point that the media should be looking at, is that the government could maybe do more to kind of expose this corporate mafia nexus. But what they do is they completely take the other way, and they said, well, it's Modi's fault. It's Modi's fault because he's a nationalist. It's the BJP government's fault because it is a so-called Hindu government, and they're just trying to murder journalists. And when you make that argument, your argument completely loses all credibility, and you sound like a raving lunatic, which is what these newspapers sound like. Rather than actually look at the core of these issues, they are more interested in fear-mongering. So again, guys, I think it's very important to expose this bias, and it's very important to kind of point out this bias, point out this discrepancy in facts, and call it out. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did enjoy today's episode, make sure to share this episode. Make sure to spread the information. Make sure to like today's show, and make sure to subscribe to the show's channel. All right, guys, thank you again for watching today's show. I will see you again on Wednesday. And until then, stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you soon.